Chapter 3. On Jurisdiction and its Disputes. Elias learned quickly that silence was not absence. It was spacing, the measured intervals between procedural states, gaps during which nothing was communicated, yet everything was recalibrated. He recognized this from institutional reviews, the quiet days after a report submission, when nothing appeared to happen while careers quietly changed direction, when decisions were made in rooms he would never enter, based on analyses he had provided, but would never see implemented. The Office of Record Compliance did not speak again that night, and Elias did not sleep. He sat at the small kitchen table he'd acquired at an estate sale shortly after moving in. Solid oak, scarred by decades of use, the kind of furniture that outlasted its original owners through sheer density of purpose. The book lay precisely at its center, unopened but somehow expectant, like a file awaiting review. The house remained cooperative in that particular way. Well-maintained facilities remain cooperative, lights functional, water steady, heating cycling on schedule, no anomalies demanding attention. That compliance unsettled him more than resistance would have. Resistance could be analyzed, understood, addressed through appropriate intervention. Cooperation without apparent cause suggested systems operating beyond his perception, influences he could not yet map. At dawn, that peculiar hour when darkness doesn't lift so much as thin into translucence, he opened the book. Morning light fell across the pages at an angle, illuminating the text, but somehow failing to warm it, as if the parchment absorbed light without accepting its heat. A new section had been appended, not inserted. Appended, as if the document had always been waiting for this moment in sequence, as if his progress through the audit followed a template prepared centuries ago by hands that understood exactly what would be required and in what order. The heading was unambiguous: Precedent, Disputed Jurisdictions. Beneath it, a note appeared in that same precise, inhuman script he was coming to recognize: Review required due to concurrent claims. Elias leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him in a complaint that had become familiar.
Concurrent,
he repeated aloud, testing the word's weight.
So this isn't unilateral.
The answer came from somewhere behind his right shoulder, though when he turned, instinct overriding the knowledge that nothing visible would be there, the kitchen remained exactly as it had been, empty, morning light creeping across the linoleum, the coffee maker he had set to automatic timer beginning its familiar gurgle and hiss.
No office operates in isolation.
That sentence carried weight beyond its literal meaning, not as philosophy, but as warning, the kind of understated caution that appears in technical manuals before describing procedures that can result in catastrophic failure if performed incorrectly. Elias turned the page, his fingers careful against parchment that felt simultaneously fragile and indestructible, like touching something that existed in multiple states, simultaneously, present in this moment yet anchored across centuries. The entries were denser here, less tidy, the ink varying in shade and viscosity, as if different substances had been used across different eras, each scribe working with whatever materials their particular century provided. Some lines appeared sharp as fresh cuts, others faded to the color of old bruises. Marginalia overlapped, words crowding the edges as if jostling for position, competing for space and attention. Entire passages had been struck through and replaced, not erased but countered, arguments preserved even in their refutation. Where the previous sections had felt like settled law, codified and accepted, this one read like a battleground frozen mid-conflict, armies caught in permanent stance of opposition.
This is appeals?
Elias said, his legal training surfacing automatically to provide framework.
Incorrect,
The office replied, and Elias could almost feel the correction being applied to his mental model, adjustments made with surgical precision.
This is overlap.
He nodded slowly, understanding settling into place. In every large institution he had ever audited, authority failed not at the edges, not where responsibility ended cleanly and jurisdictions were clearly delineated, but at the seams, where responsibility blurred and accountability fractured. Overlap was where errors hid, and power negotiated itself into permanence, where ambiguity became weapon and clarity became threat. A particular annotation caught his eye, written in a hand markedly different from the others, elongated, almost elegant, the ink darker and richer, the script confident in a way that suggested authority rather than mere record-keeping. Scope exceeded. Intervention justified.
That's not your handwriting.
Elias observed, the statement emerging as both question and conclusion. For the first time since the audit began, the response did not arrive immediately. The silence that followed was different from the procedural pauses he had grown accustomed to. This felt like consideration, perhaps even consultation, as if his observation had triggered some protocol that required authorization before response could be provided. When the office finally spoke, it was with what Elias could only describe as care, each word selected with the precision of someone navigating diplomatic territory, acknowledging truths that were technically accurate while avoiding implications that might prove problematic.
That notation does not originate from this office.
The room felt marginally smaller, not in any way his eyes could confirm, but in a manner his body registered nonetheless. The walls no closer, but somehow more present, as if attention itself occupied space, as if being observed altered the fundamental properties of the environment.
How many offices are involved here?
Elias asked, knowing the answer would be important, that understanding the scope of what he was dealing with was essential before he could begin to comprehend its implications.
Active claims currently recognized. 4.
He absorbed that number, felt its weight. 4 separate jurisdictions, 4 distinct functions, all somehow intersecting in ways that required resolution. 4 voices arguing in margins across centuries, none willing to concede, all maintaining their claims through sheer persistence.
And how many are aware I exist?
He pressed, suspecting the answer would be less than 4, that his presence in this system was still propagating through whatever channels governed communication between these ancient functions. Another pause, this one briefer.
2.
Elias exhaled slowly, processing the implications.
That's efficient.
He said, the word carrying more irony than he intended but less than the situation probably warranted.
Containment is preferable to correction,
The office replied, and in that statement Elias heard entire volumes of organizational philosophy compressed into 7 words.
Broader awareness introduces complexity. Complexity increases risk of escalation.
Then why involve me at all?
It was the question that had been building since the previous night, since the moment he'd been informed an audit was required. If containment mattered, if limiting awareness was the priority, why introduce a human element into a system that had apparently functioned, however imperfectly, for centuries without one? The answer, when it came, was colder than anything he had heard yet, delivered with the effectless precision of a system executing protocols it had not designed but would not question.
Because escalation has already occurred.
The book shifted in response to those words, pages moving without his touch, responding to something beyond physical interaction. A section he had not yet seen, had not even known existed within the volume's finite pages, revealed itself, marked with a symbol he did not recognize. 3 intersecting lines, forming a closed shape that suggested neither beginning nor end, neither hierarchy nor equality, simply connection in its most abstract form. Audit event. Prior termination. Status unresolved. Beneath it, a single sentence rendered in script so precise it appeared mechanically produced, though Elias knew no machine had touched this page. The previous auditor failed to conclude jurisdictional reconciliation. Elias stared at the words, feeling cold knowledge settle into his chest, heavy and undeniable.
Failed how?
He asked, though part of him already suspected the answer, had been suspecting it since the moment he learned his role in this was not chosen, but inferred.
By ceasing participation. Retired?
Even as he asked, he knew this wasn't right, knew the office wouldn't have used the particular phrasing it had if something as mundane as retirement were the explanation.
No. Removed?
Though by whom or what, he couldn't imagine.
No.
The house creaked softly, not from age but adjustment, wood and foundation, responding to stresses that had nothing to do with temperature or settling, everything to do with the presence of forces that operated according to principles his education had not prepared him to understand.
The auditor exercised refusal.
Elias closed his eyes briefly, understanding flooding through him with the cold certainty of water finding its level. In his world, the world of organizational compliance and institutional review, refusal was a luxury. It belonged to people who believed consequences were optional, who thought they could simply walk away from responsibilities without those responsibilities following, adapting, persisting in their absence.
What happened to them?
He asked, opening his eyes to find the page had changed again, new text, appearing as if in direct response to his question, annotations manifesting in real time rather than having existed all along. The answer came in the form of an amendment, words appearing beneath the prior entry in ink that looked fresh, wet. Though when he cautiously touched the page, his finger came away clean. Condition, record continued without witness.
That's it?
Elias said, unable to keep the disbelief entirely from his voice.
That's the consequence. The record just continued.
The absence of record is not neutral,
the office replied, and in those words Elias heard something that might have been the closest thing to concern an institutional function could express.
When no witness remains, enforcement becomes discretionary. Discretion permits interpretation. Interpretation enables deviation. Deviation compounds. The cycle accelerates until correction requires intervention at scales that damage the integrity of the system itself.
Elias felt the shape of the danger then, not sharp and immediate, but vast and inexorable, like standing at the base of a glacier and realizing the ice has been advancing for centuries, carving valleys through stone with patience that makes human lifespans irrelevant.
You're saying,
he said carefully, making sure he understood the full implications,
that the system didn't stop when the previous auditor refused. It just continued without oversight.
Systems do not stop,
the office corrected, and the correction felt important, fundamental.
They persist until constrained. Without witness, constraints erode. Without constraints, offices optimize towards self-interest rather than systemic integrity.
And I'm the constraint.
Statement, not question. Understanding settling into place like the final piece of a mechanism clicking home, enabling motion that had been suspended, waiting.
Provisional.
The office qualified, and somehow that single word carried more warning than any threat could have.
Permanence requires completion. Completion requires confronting what the previous auditor could not.
Elias gave a humorless smile, the expression pulling at his face without reaching his eyes.
Of course it does.
He looked down at the book again, at the layered handwriting, the contested margins, the unresolved claims written in hands spanning centuries. Somewhere within these pages, offices were arguing, not with voices or violence, but with outcomes, each demonstrating their necessity through effects that rippled across human affairs in patterns too consistent to be coincidental, yet too subtle to be obvious.
Who's the other office?
He asked, needing to understand what forces were aligned against record compliance, what function it felt its jurisdiction infringed upon sufficiently to maintain a centuries-long dispute. The answer came with unmistakable reluctance, as if the office knew that speaking the name would alter Elias's understanding of what he had agreed to, would shift his perception of this audit from administrative review to something far more complex.
The Office of Intervention.
The name carried weight entirely different from record compliance, where compliance suggested measurement, verification, the passive act of witnessing and documenting. Intervention implied timing and judgment and action, taken before justification could be fully established. Intervention was enforcement without consensus, correction implemented preemptively, based on probability rather than proof. Elias stood slowly, his chair scraping against the linoleum with a sound that seemed too loud in the kitchen's morning quiet.
That's not compliance,
he said, understanding the fundamental conflict.
Correct.
That's enforcement.
Correct.
And you're telling me? Elias continued, his mind racing through implications, connecting patterns, seeing the system's architecture reveal itself.
That enforcement and compliance don't agree.
Silence stretched between statement and response, longer than any pause yet, and in that silence Elias understood that he had articulated something the office had known for centuries, but perhaps never stated so directly.
They rarely do.
The book closed itself, not with the soft finality he had come to expect, but with an audible snap that sounded remarkably like a door being locked, a boundary being established, a line being drawn that had not existed moments before.
You are now within contested jurisdiction,
the office informed him, and the statement carried the weight of legal notice, formal acknowledgement that the rules had changed, that what had been review was becoming something else.
Further access will require positional alignment.
Elias rested his hand on the cover, feeling the leather warm beneath his palm, responding to his touch, or perhaps to something else entirely, to his acceptance, his commitment, his willingness to proceed despite understanding the danger.
Meaning?
A final clarification appeared in his mind with the clarity of words written in fire, impossible to misunderstand or ignore.
You will be required to observe an intervention.
The lights dimmed, not as before with that measured procedural adjustment, but unevenly this time, asymmetrically, as if different powers were asserting themselves, competing for influence over the environment itself, somewhere in the house, upstairs perhaps, or in the basement, Elias couldn't quite localize it. Something adjusted that had not been designed to move, wood or metal shifting position, with a sound that was almost organic, almost alive. Elias did not step back. He had learned long ago that fear was information, data to be processed rather than emotion to be obeyed.
Then schedule it,
He said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to filter into his bloodstream. The pause that followed was not procedural. It was, if such a thing were possible for an institutional function, surprised, perhaps even pleased, as if the office had expected resistance, negotiation, the kind of cautious hedging that characterized human responses to danger, and instead received cooperation based on comprehension rather than compliance based on fear.
Observation window pending,
The office replied, and Elias could have sworn he detected something like approval in its tone.
You will be notified.
The book remained closed, sealed not just physically, but in some other way Elias couldn't quite articulate, as if it had withdrawn from active engagement, retreated into dormancy until circumstances required its activation. For the first time since the audit began, Elias felt something shift in his chest cavity, a sensation he couldn't immediately categorize. Not fear. He knew fear, had felt it often enough in his career when data revealed patterns that powerful people preferred remain unacknowledged. This was different, sharper, more focused, anticipation, the recognition of challenge, the intellectual excitement that came from confronting a system sufficiently complex that understanding it would require everything he had learned and more besides. He carried his coffee cup to the sink, rinsed it with movements that were automatic, habitual, grounding himself in mundane action, while his mind processed what he had just learned. Through the window above the sink, he could see his neighbors beginning their morning routines, the retired couple emerging to tend their garden, the young family loading children into a minivan with the controlled chaos that characterized school day mornings. Normal life, proceeding with the oblivious contentment of people who had no idea that ancient jurisdictions were being contested in the house next door, that forces which had shaped human civilization for millennia were preparing to demonstrate their persistence to an audience of one. Elias dried his hands and looked back at the book, still centered on his kitchen table, innocuous in the strengthening morning light.
I should probably eat something.
He said to the empty kitchen.
If I'm going to observe an intervention, I should be properly prepared.
The house settled around him with the particular quality of agreement, or perhaps that was just his imagination, his tendency to perceive pattern and intention where perhaps only coincidence existed, but probably not.